The following program is a production of the Hennepin County Library.
Welcome to a discussion with Ed McBain. I'm Bob Rolfe, the director of the Hennepin County Library, and we're going to interview our guest today, Ed McBain, who is a very famous author, and his latest book is Mary, Mary. Ed's a native of New York, and he's the author of over 80 plays, novels, short stories, screenplays, and he's sold more than 20 million copies of his writings, which makes him a major American author. Under his name Evan Hunter, he's written over a dozen novels. Probably the best known is the one called Blackboard Jungle. But he's also very well known for his 87th Precinct Mystery Series and for the Matthew Hope series. His latest book, Mary, Mary, is a member of the Matthew Hope, and the latest one in that series, it's the 10th. He's also written several screenplays, including The Birds and Fuzz. The Birds is also probably the best known because it was done with Alfred Hitchcock. 3 of his novels were made into movies: The Blackboard Jungle, Strangers When We Meet, and Last Summer. And Blackboard Jungle is probably considered the definitive story on juvenile delinquency, and it was written way back in 1956. He's probably best known, however, for the 87th Precinct series, which he writes under the name of Ed McBain, but more on that later. Today we're here to talk about the latest Matthew Hope story, Mary, Mary, which features the Florida criminal attorney Matthew Hope. And as the publisher's blurb says, Matthew Hope has never represented a guilty client, and he doesn't intend to start now. I've had the opportunity to read the book already, although its publication date was just April 6th. And I was going to start asking a lot of questions about the book based on my reading it, but I'd rather have Ed McBain talk about it himself and kind of tell us what that book is all about from his perspective. And then we'll get to some questions. So if I may, Ed, why don't you tell us about Mary, Mary?
Yeah, it's premised on the nursery rhyme, you know, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow, etc. And all of the titles in this Matthew Hope series are taken from nursery rhymes or fairy tales. And in this instance, the nursery rhyme proves to be prophetic because in Mary's garden are found 3 pretty maids all in a row. And she is charged with murdering them and burying them in her garden. Eyewitnesses have seen her all over the state of Florida abducting the 3 children, and one eyewitness has seen her burying one of the children in her yard. Matthew Hope believes she is innocent and takes on the case. He won't ever defend anyone he believes is guilty. He feels there are enough attorneys in the world who will do that. If an axe murderer comes to him and asks to defend him and get him off with a lesser plea, Matthew will not take the case. But he strongly believes Mary is innocent, and he takes on the case. And she's a cantankerous old lady who used to teach school in England earlier on. She is very bitter about having been accused of this crime. She feels it's a continuation of the persecution of the people in the neighborhood who feel she's an eccentric and have always chanted Mary, Mary, quite contrary at her. So Matthew has his work cut out for him, so to speak. And that is where we go, from there into the book.
Mary, Mary struck me as a very odd kind of creature. And I was wondering how you got the idea for this woman who, with her contrariness, almost fought her attorney during the process. At least that was my view of it, rather than helping him.
Yeah, that is true. She's very conflicted about the whole thing, as the reader will discover as he or she delves further into the book. She seems almost self-destructive, not willing to cooperate with Matthew, shouting obscenities, wanting him to do impossible things, get her out of jail when she knows bail has been denied because the crimes are so heinous. But nonetheless, she's a woman, as her background begins coming out during the trial and during what other people testify at the trial, who has in the past been responsible for encouraging young minds and nurturing young girls until they become intelligent, strong, resourceful women. And this is an enormous contribution for anyone to make. So there is this conflicted personality that we come to know and love.
Well, there were times I loved it, and there were times, frankly, I thought, what in the world is he wasting his time trying to defend this person
Yeah,
for?
well, that's the idea.
You know, procedural description of really been a hallmark both of the 87th Precinct series and also now of the Matthew Hope books. But the 87th Precinct series, concentrate on police procedure, and the Hope series, because he's an attorney, concentrate on legal procedures.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, have you spent a lot of time at court trials or reading court procedures, or
I wrote
where do you get this legal background?
Yeah, I wrote an Evan Hunter novel about 7 years ago, I guess, called Lizzie, about Lizzie Borden. And it wasn't a mystery. It was more, I felt that this was something of a generational conflict. As Evan Hunter, I've written many, many novels about family relationships and all, and it seemed to me that the biggest conflict any family could ever have would be for the daughter to pick up a hatchet and nail her father and her stepmother. So I read through 1,200 or so odd pages of the Lizzie Borden trial and rearranged it. I practically had the thing memorized before I wrote the book. And law seemed very interesting to me. And even though the Matthew Hope series has been going on now since 1968, I suppose, Matthew has never taken a case to trial before this one.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was set in Florida, I had to know something about Florida law. And I also had to know how a judge thinks and how a prosecuting attorney thinks. I worked with a lawyer in New York who was a former DA and who now practices law privately, defending people. And I worked with a lawyer in Florida who is now in private practice, but who used to be a judge. So I had the whole circle there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something, every American, because he's seen so many movies and so many television shows, feels he really knows what goes on in the trial. The shorthand to the trial is, Your Honor, I object, sustained or overruled, right? And if I hear one more outburst in this court, I'll clear the entire room of spectators. But when you're writing a novel about a lawyer who's objecting, you had better know what he's objecting to and why he's objecting. You'd better know the point of law that is causing him to jump up out of his seat and say, I object. Mm-hmm. And so throughout the trial, I try to instruct the reader on not only what is happening, but also why it is happening, the strategies behind it.
I noticed that. I mean, you'll be describing a dialogue from somebody's total different perspective, and then all of a sudden you jump back into a description of what, for example, what a summation is all about and what it's supposed to do, or what the particular procedure is that's in question here, which is kind of unusual for most court cases. And I'll say frankly, I'm a mystery fan, and I have been reading mysteries for 35 or 40 years. I've often thought they take an awful lot of liberties with the legal procedures and the law, and I'm not sure the authors do the kind of research that you do, and that those criminal cases that are presented are really as accurate as they make them sound.
Well, I always feel that if I don't do my homework and if I don't really know what I'm writing about, Ernest Hemingway used to say, when you start writing about something, know everything there is to know about it and then use 10% of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's interesting.
And I feel that I really have to know what this is about, because there's someone out there who knows what it's about. And if I make a mistake, he's going to let me know, or she will let me know instantly. There'll be a letter in the mail.
Sometimes an inaccurate letter, I suspect.
Yeah, many times. Because I try to check what I've written with at least 2 sources each time, if it's something as important as a legal point, And I make sure it's right.
Well, let me ask you.
So some lawyer now will read the book and say, hey, wise guy, you make sure it's right. Well, how about this on page 37?
Well, as I recall, you even got into the details of the difference between Florida law and New York law. I mean, those are pretty fine distinctions for
they
people
really
to
are,
make,
yeah.
and yet they're very crucial ones, too.
Yeah.
I guess I can tell the reader that don't give up on the story in terms of you're thinking you've got it figured out until the very end, because you're in for a big surprise.
Okay.
I had it figured out twice.
Oh, good.
And I was still surprised, and I think that's a real hallmark of a good mystery story.
I like to do that. I like to give the reader all the facts that I have and play absolutely square with him from minute one. And then I hope still to surprise him by the end of the book.
Well, you certainly surprised me, and I gave the book to someone else to read, and they said it surprised them too.
Good.
So I think that that's you hit your target on the head there.
Good.
I'd like to go back to something that's always struck me with your various books, the 87th Precinct in particular. I'd say your characters exhibit many of the current social conditions, such as divorce and cynicism and perhaps some mixture of idealism. But they also have a very strong ethical sense, but it's not tied into a theological sense, or it's not tied into a religious sense. It seems to be more than anything else kind of a police code of right or wrong rather than a theological one.
No, it's not a theological one, certainly. I believe that we have spent centuries devising a body of law designed to protect us against others and also to protect us against ourselves because of what we know we are to be. And I think most policemen go into law enforcement, at first anyway, because they really do have a sense of wanting to enforce these laws that have taken us centuries to evolve. It's an enormously stressful job, and many of them burn out after a very short while. But while they still believe that we are the good guys and they are the bad guys, then they are doing a real service for us. For those of us who wish to believe that these things do not, to sweep it under the carpet. The cops can't sweep it under the carpet because they see it 24 hours a day and they deal with it. They can carry this to extreme limits sometimes, this good guy, bad guy mentality, and confuse a man who passes a stoplight to someone holding up a mom and pop grocery store. You know, there's a distinction there that policemen sometimes are not able to make. And this is when they go over that line that results in an incident like the one in Los Angeles with Rodney King, where all they knew they had on their hands was a speeder, you know, and then there was no need for what they did. And yet I'm sure that the guys who did it still think of themselves as the good guys, you know. So you got it's a tremendous obligation and a tremendous responsibility, and with it, it carries a power that can go wrong.
Well, you said earlier that you've spent a lot of time studying the legal procedures. It's obvious to me from the 87th Precinct series that you must have spent a lot of time talking with policemen, or maybe even riding in squad patrols or walking with them or whatever,
Yeah,
because there's a...
When I first started the series, yeah. They were a little reluctant to let me in at first because they knew I'd written The Blackboard Jungle. And they thought, oh, here he comes. He's going to do a number on the police now.
He's gotten rid of the education system.
Now
He's going to get the police.
Now he's going to get us. But I finally convinced him I was trying to write sympathetic novels about the police that displayed them and their wives and their husbands and boyfriends and what have you in absolutely realistic terms. You know, and in order to do that, I had to be with them and I had to study how they worked. And finally, they let me in. And over the years, I keep going back to refresh my memory on things. And because I'm known as a writer of police novels, whenever they're going to do a television show, a pilot based on a cop somewhere or other, they'll ask me if I want to do it. And so I've worked with the New Orleans police and the Houston police and the emergency service in New York and the police in Sarasota, obviously, to write the Matthew Hope novels.
My guess was, and maybe you just said it, that Calusa was another name for Sarasota.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I've only been there once, so that wasn't too bad. To
Really?
guess that, yeah.
And you detected that from reading
Well,
the
it
book?
was the connections with the neighboring towns and the airport connection and everything that was
yeah.
in Mary, and I thought that's got to be Sarasota.
We had a winter home down there for a great many years, and that's when I started writing the series. I was still living in Sarasota.
Yeah. Well, getting back to your policemen, which fascinate me, and you know, for a native New Yorker, you certainly have a warm spot for the police. And to a lot of visitors, that's kind of a surprise.
Yeah, I don't think many people like cops, you know, so I have, and I don't like them on occasion, you know. Which makes it difficult to do the job I do, because I try to write sympathetically about them, and so have to overcome a natural anger about policemen.
Well, I think you do. You know, the police squad is really the heroes. They're the heroes and they're the characters in the 87th Precinct. And the thing that struck me about it is that none of them are the current vogue, the strong, wild hero type like the Clint Eastwood. These are just kind of day-to-day, strong,
Yeah.
personable, real people, and they deal with a lot of their own personal problems.
Yeah, I don't like macho men, and I'm not a macho man myself. And
Well, I think
don't
that comes
particularly-
true, frankly, in your stories.
Yeah,
you know.
I think so. The cops in my police series are very capable of breaking a guy's arm when they need to.
Oh.
But for the most part, they're just out doing the job and going at it and getting the facts and solving the case. And Matthew Hope is certainly not a knight on a shining white horse, you know.
No, but neither is he the, how do I put this, the obnoxious defense attorney that a lot of people picture in their mind when they see a defense attorney.
Yeah, in fact, you know, Matthew is modest to the point of absurdity. He's almost self-effacing. He's a very bright guy and a very attractive guy, but I find his modesty kind of attractive in itself.
Well, didn't you have the same thing in Steve Carella in the 87th Precinct? He's basically a modest person, I think.
That was it. He is, yeah, I suppose so, and a person who would feel enormously uncomfortable in an expensive restaurant that Matthew Hope can afford.
That's yeah, true.
I remember when the series was, I guess, 3 books old. My publishers called me and they said, "Evan, Carella has to go."
Oh my.
I said, "Go where?" He said, "He is not an attractive man to be the lead character in this series. He's married, he has children, women will reject him, and the series will go downhill. You'll have to introduce someone who can be more exciting and who can have a girlfriend in each book and all that." So I introduced a cop named Cotton Hawes.
Oh yes, the
tall
one
and
with the
handsome,
white stain.
red-headed, yeah, white streak in his hair. And he was a hero for a book or so, but Carella just kept coming back,
Yeah.
coming back. And I think anyway, women find him attractive, not because he's a straight arrow, I guess. He's a
Sure.
decent human being, you know. And
Well, I'll get back to some of the other characters, but Teddy, who is Carella's deaf wife, is almost too good to be true. Is there a model for Teddy in your life?
no, I never met a person who was as the politically correct people would have it, hearing impaired and speech impaired,
Yeah.
which I find sort of derogatory. I've used it in a couple of books, but I'm going to go back to deaf-mute, which I find hearing impaired makes a person sound deficient in some way.
I agree with
on
you.
the whole,
You know, I don't. Maybe it's just that I'm used to the other terms,
Yeah,
but it does seem more denigrating than the old terms.
I thought
do.
so. But she has grown over the years. When the
Yeah.
series first started, I just conceived of her as a person who, because she could neither speak nor hear, would be enormously vulnerable to any sort of woman in jeopardy situation.
And you put
And
her
I
in
did
one.
that
Yeah.
in several of the books. But then it seemed to me I was getting to be too much Mr. and Mrs. North. So over the years, she's developed as a very strong character in her own right. You know, she's just a wonderful. She's not only a helpmeet, she's a force. You know.
Well, you've got a lot of wonderful characters in there. I think, you know, Bert Kling is one, and Meyer with that absurd name that you gave him is another one. And Lieutenant Burns has struck me as, you know, probably one of the most likable police lieutenants I've ever read about.
Yeah, he's a
Because
nice
even
one.
when he's tough, he's really a nice person, and when he has to put the screws to the guys, he does it kind of gently and empathizes.
He's a good, you
with
know,
them.
a long time ago, we're talking about characters and a continuing series that is now 44 books long.
Right.
I'll get to Matthew Hope in a minute because this was an entirely different situation. But years ago, a friend and I, who was a producer, came up for a notion about a television series, a comedy series. And we approached Mel Brooks about it. And because we figured he'd be perfect to write it. He had just come off Get Smart, and it was a very successful show. And we got to discussing series in general, and we got to discussing the 87 Precinct and television series. And Mel Brooks said, he said, any series is about a family in a house. He said it may seem to be about doctors in a hospital, but in those doctors there's the older guy and the younger guy and the visiting guy. And it may seem to be about a police station with a lieutenant and detectives, but it all gets down to a family in a house. And I remember that from long ago. And the 87 Precinct is in fact a family in a house, and the Matthew Hope series is now about a family in a house. His repertory company is now in place around him.
Well, I was going to mention that. You have his investigators, and you have, well, now you have a girlfriend on the scene again, and you have his daughter that periodically comes in and out of the story, and a wife that in one of the stories came back and now is gone again. Who knows, you may bring her back again. We'll
Maybe, yeah. I have to keep him, you see, in the 87 precinct, Corella is married, true, and he has children, true. But there are other guys in the series, other cops who can roam the field and introduce other women in each of the books. With Matthew Hope, if I had him marry again or even begin living with someone on a steady basis, which is the same as his being married, there's no one else in the series who can carry the romantic lead, so he has to remain single.
Yeah. One last comment on the characters, and then I'll get to some general writing questions. You've introduced a couple of others in the 87th Precinct series who are so different. I don't know how anybody could like Andy Parker or Fat Ollie Weeks, for example.
Yeah, well, they're the bad apple.
Yeah, but then you've got a pair of homicide people in there, Monahan and Monroe. Yeah. And I said to myself, they're kind of like a pair of Falstaffian people that add a little black humor to the show here.
Yeah, they're like a Greek chorus.
Yeah,
who come
they show up at the oddest
comment
times.
on the body and make ridiculous black macabre humor about what's going on when there's someone hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
But I like them. I like those two guys. They always dress in black with black fedoras, and they think they look very dapper. They think they look like Cary Grant and Fred Astaire, you know, in an old movie. Instead, they look like two fat penguins.
Well, they're great comic relief. That's what they struck me as, kind of a Falstaff type in the books. You've got several trademarks. One is you're a quick read. It's very easy to read your books. I think the other is that you can sometimes go into enormous detail, and I've wondered whether some of this detail is a trick or a diversion. For example, you'll drop something in there about he got a phone call at 6:17, or you'll describe a scarf somebody is wearing in great detail, and that person may not even be a major part of the book. And I wonder if these kind of like red herrings, and whether I should pay attention to these.
No, I don't. I don't do that deliberately. I mean, I don't deliberately try to mislead by saying 6:17 or a scarf was paisley.
Let me say, they make the people real. I mean, they're not cardboard this way. Some of these odd discussions that the squad carries on. Yeah. These are real discussions, you know, like the guys have around coffee at 10:30 on a Monday morning.
I used to study art. You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a painter. I didn't want to be a writer. And I used to study art.
Well, I'm glad you chose writing.
Thank you. But I think maybe because when you're an artist, you're taught to see everything with a frame around it, you know, and to pick out which corner of the canvas you're going to emphasize something. So maybe this is why my eye still will describe a paisley scarf that may not have much to do with the whole composition, but that will, in that moment, make a point that will catch the eye for that moment, you know.
Going back to Matthew Hope again, why do you pick the nursery titles or the fairy tales? Rumpelstiltskin was one, Mary Mary is another one.
Well, I think it's scary to take what sounds like. I understand anyway that these nursery rhymes were far from innocent even when they were first written.
Oh, that's right. We have a lot of
fairy tales.
A lot of fun with that in the library when people complain about violence in today's storybooks for children. I say, go back and read the original fairy tales if you want to see real violence.
Yeah. So I have a lot of fun in taking what the original fairy tale was, or nursery rhyme, and twisting it for my own needs and turning it into something kind of terrifying.
Your stories always have a great mixture of a combination, in my mind, of terror and suspense and a little black humor.
Yeah.
What do you think is the best way to build suspense for the reader? What keeps the reader hanging on the edge? How do you approach that?
One of the things I learned when I was working with Hitchcock on The Birds, he taught me the difference. I think I may have known it unconsciously, but he certainly solidified it with words. The difference between suspense and shock. Shock is, you and I are sitting here on this television set, and suddenly an explosion occurs and kills us both, and knocks over all the cameramen and the lights and everything else. That's shock. Suspense is, you and I are sitting here talking, as we are now, and the viewer can see a bomb ticking here, a clock ticking and attached to 3 sticks of dynamite, and that we do not know about. And as the conversation goes on, the clock moves, and the viewer is privy to seeing that bomb and that clock moving on toward when it's going to explode. And when that is suspense. Is it going to explode or will it not? See,
Well,
that's the difference.
that sounds like a Hitchcock description, all right.
It is it's
You know.
right from his lips.
Yeah, I can believe that without any trouble. I alluded to it earlier. You do have a strong moral code, but it's not one you could put a label on. I mean, nobody could call it connected with the religion, and nobody could connect it with even a school of theology. It's just a strong right and wrong moral code.
Someone, a reviewer once said, Evan Hunter is as stern a moralist for his time as Tolstoy was for his. I don't know what it is. I think I just have a sense of what is decent and what is not. You know, and invariably, whenever Corella in the 87th Precinct arrives on the scene and sees a body on the floor or wherever in a bed or wherever the body may be, there's a moment of pain in his eyes as he looks down there, and you know, the thought, what a waste. Here's a human being destroyed. And I think it bothers me when human beings hurt each other in any kind of way, you know, and murder, of course, is the worst kind of way you can hurt someone. You steal that person's life. And if that is the morality that courses through the books, then I'm happy for it.
Well, I think it's safe to say that I've read all 44 of your Ed McBain series on the 87th Precinct, and I think I've read 8 of 10 of the Matthew Hope, because I went back and checked, and I've read some of your others under your real name of Evan Hunter. One thing that struck me in many of them is that either minor characters or major characters, somebody shows up being criminally insane. Is that some kind of a fascination you have, or do you feel that that's so violent?
Yeah,
That's the connection.
I don't normally like to do that because it's too easy a cop-out, you know, to make somebody nuts. But you have to remember, in my mind's eye, anyone who commits murder is criminally insane. You know, I mean, this would be the justification for anything. You know, the guy is crazy. But most people who commit murders feel that they have a very, very logical reason for having done it. May sound totally illogical to you and to me. The guy can say, you know, I was watching television, and she came in and she changed the station to the soap opera she wanted to watch. So I went in the kitchen and took a hatchet and I split her head open with it. But you see, she changed the station.
Yeah.
She shouldn't have changed the station. You understand what I'm telling you? She should not have changed the station. Well, that's lunacy, but he feels it's quite logical. That great cause for hitting her on the head with a hatchet.
We've only got a few seconds, and I'm going to throw you 2 quick ones. One is, do you block out a story from the very beginning and then let it unfold, or do you have an ending and you work up towards it?
Only occasionally will I have the ending in mind. In Mary, Mary, I knew what the ending was going to be, and in several other of the novels I've known. But most often I'll start with the title, I'll jump in cold, take the story as far as my invention and creation will go, which may be 10 pages or maybe 4 chapters. Then I'll stop, I'll look back at it and say, here's what we've got now, here's what we know, where do we go from here? And I'll write another outline, another 2 or 3 chapters ahead and move on. Because I don't know what's going to happen, you know.
Sure.
I prefer to have the characters do it.
Okay. As a teaser, what do you have in mind for a future Matthew Hope story or for 87th Precinct?
The next 87 Precinct novel is finished. It's called Mischief, and in it the Deaf Man comes back.
Ah, the famous Deaf Man. Oh, I like that one.
And the next Matthew Hope novel I write will be called There Was a Little Girl, and it will have a circus background, and either the victim or the suspect will be a midget.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us with this discussion. Evan Hunter, one of my absolutely all-time favorite authors, and under the name of Ed McBain, one of America's most prolific and popular authors. And try his newest book, Mary, Mary.
Thank you. Nice meeting you, Bob.
Thank you.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.